I was just helping move boxes. Then her aunt asked me upstairs, and everything changed. The afternoon sunlight poured through the large bay windows, painting golden rectangles on the polished hardwood floors. I was in the middle of moving boxes, shifting the heavier ones with careful precision, feeling the strain in my shoulders and the subtle ache in my lower back. The smell of old books, mixed with the faint perfume lingering in the air, something floral and comforting, yet undeniably sophisticated. Each box carried not just objects, but fragments of a life I didn't know, pieces of someone's story I was momentarily part of. I had just set down a particularly heavy box of books when a voice called from the staircase. It was polite, direct, but carried a subtle warmth that made me pause. "Actually, would you mind coming upstairs for a moment? I could use an extra hand." It was the aunt. She stood there, tall, confident, with a small, knowing smile that hinted she expected obedience but also understood boundaries. Her presence had a grounding effect. The room suddenly felt smaller, cozier, charged with a soft energy I couldn't quite identify. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, catching a glimpse of the staircase leading upward. The wooden steps creaked slightly under my weight as I climbed, and with each step, the scent of polished wood mixed with faint hints of her perfume, something powdery, warm, and inviting. The sun from a small skylight fell across the stairwell, dust motes floating lazily in the beams of light, giving the space an almost ethereal glow. My hands itched to adjust my shirt from the mild sweat of lifting boxes, but part of me felt a strange awareness that this upstairs space was more personal, more intimate. As I reached the top, the hallway stretched out in front of me. It was narrower, lined with framed photographs and delicate pieces of art. There was a quiet rhythm to the house that I hadn't noticed downstairs, the faint hum of the heating, the muffled ticking of a clock somewhere nearby, and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath me. My palms brushed against the railing as I walked, and I noticed how the soft paint felt smooth and worn in all the right places, like a subtle memory of human touch. She appeared then, almost effortlessly, from a doorway just ahead. I didn't see her clearly yet, only enough to feel a jolt of awareness, something in her posture, the tilt of her head, the gentle confidence with which she carried herself. She was the kind of person who drew your attention without meaning to. I felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervous anticipation, the kind that makes a simple glance feel loaded with possibility. Her aunt's voice lingered for a moment behind me, almost teasing. "Be careful up here." I nodded, aware that even the simplest instruction now felt layered with expectation, tension, and unspoken possibility. And as I moved forward, boxes in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was waiting upstairs would change the rhythm of the day and perhaps something inside me forever. The stage was set. The house was alive with the quiet sounds of domesticity, the sunlight and dust motes casting a private theater for our meeting. And I, a young man tasked with moving boxes, had unknowingly stepped into a space where something more than work was about to unfold, an encounter that would tug at curiosity, stir the senses, and plant the first seeds of connection that neither of us could yet name. The doorway framed her in a way that made me pause for just a heartbeat longer than polite. She was leaning slightly against the doorframe, one hand brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the other resting lightly on the door. The sunlight from the skylight spilled across her figure, highlighting the graceful lines of her shoulders and the gentle curve of her neck. She was confident, effortlessly composed, but there was a quiet softness in her eyes, a hint of vulnerability beneath the poised exterior, that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Ah, you're here," she said, her voice smooth and warm, yet casual enough to make me feel slightly off balance. There was an elegance in the way she spoke, the kind that suggested both life experience and a certain ease in her own skin. I nodded, shifting the box in my arms, suddenly conscious of its weight, but also of the way the light caught her hair, the subtle movements of her hands, the delicate scent of perfume that lingered faintly in the air, something soft, almost like sandalwood mingled with fresh linen. We moved around the room together, arranging boxes and unpacking items with careful, coordinated gestures. At first, our interactions were functional, passing books, adjusting frames, clearing space on tables. Yet every small motion felt charged with unspoken energy. When our hands brushed while reaching for the same object, the contact lingered just a moment longer than necessary, sending a subtle jolt through me. I caught myself glancing at her in these fleeting moments, noting the curve of her lips as she concentrated, the way her fingers lightly rested on a book before placing it carefully on the shelf. She spoke occasionally, soft anecdotes about the contents of the boxes, memories of travels, stories of friends and family, small reflections on life. Each story revealed layers of experience, humor, and quiet wisdom. I found myself listening intently, not just to the words, but to the cadence of her voice, the way it seemed to warm the room around her. I responded with honesty, sharing my own perspective, sometimes tentative, sometimes bold, feeling a rare ease in our exchange, as if she genuinely wanted to hear what I thought. The room itself seemed to participate in the tension, every sound amplified. The subtle creak of floorboards, the rustle of paper, the soft hum of the heating, all underscored the intimacy of proximity. Light filtered through the window, casting fleeting shadows across our faces. A stray beam caught her profile, highlighting a small smile that appeared when our eyes met unexpectedly. In that moment, it was as if the world narrowed to just the two of us, and the boxes, the furniture, the mundane task, faded into the background. I caught myself noticing the little details, the curve of her wrist, the delicate way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the warmth of her glance. My heart raced in a quiet, restrained way, a whisper of longing that I had no intention of acting on yet. And yet, I couldn't help but feel that something subtle, unspoken, and entirely new was forming between us. By the time we paused to rest, leaning against the same bookshelf while catching our breath, there was a tension that neither of us named, but both of us felt. It wasn't a question of desire yet. It was a question of awareness, of the first realization that we had entered a space where connection could quietly, inevitably, grow. By mid-afternoon, the room had taken on the quiet rhythm of shared work. Boxes lined the walls, half unpacked, and the air smelled faintly of cardboard mingled with the subtle scent of her perfume, a delicate mix of lavender and vanilla that seemed to cling to the corners of the room. Every movement between us, from adjusting a lamp to stacking books, carried a gentle tension, heightened by our proximity and the unspoken awareness that lingered in the spaces between words. We worked side by side, occasionally reaching for the same object, a fragile porcelain figurine, a stack of old journals, a framed photograph. Each accidental touch sent a subtle jolt through me, a mixture of surprise and anticipation. Our hands would graze, and I found myself holding my breath for the briefest of moments before she looked up with a small, knowing smile, as if she had felt the same spark. The brush of her fingers on my hand or forearm was never forced, but it lingered long enough to leave an impression, an invisible mark of connection. She shared small stories as we worked. Not grand tales of adventure, but quiet moments that revealed character, a childhood memory of learning to dance, a story about a favorite book, a reflection on a challenge she had faced in her career. Each tale was told with a casual grace, yet underneath I sensed layers of experience, wisdom, and subtle vulnerability. I listened, fascinated, offering comments here and there, sharing my perspective with an honesty that surprised even me. In these exchanges, the walls between us seemed to thin, leaving a space filled with quiet understanding. Her laughter was soft but genuine, and it caught me off guard. It was the kind of sound that made the room feel warmer, the sunlight streaming through the windows more golden, even the weight of the boxes less cumbersome. I noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, how the sunlight reflected in her hair, how her movements, simple gestures like adjusting a frame or tucking her hair behind her ear, held an elegance that seemed effortless yet intentional. We paused briefly to rearrange some furniture, standing close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her side. The subtle shifts in our stance, the way our shoulders nearly touched as we moved a chair together, created a quiet tension that neither of us acknowledged aloud. But internally, every accidental brush and every lingering glance deepened my awareness, forcing me to consider my feelings in ways I hadn't before. The room itself seemed alive with quiet intimacy. The creak of the floorboards beneath us, the faint hum of the heating, the gentle rustle of papers, and the distant ticking of a clock all combined to create a rhythm that mirrored our own shared heartbeat. Each sound, each movement, each glance contributed to an undercurrent of connection that was slow, deliberate, and entirely unspoken. By the time we paused for a short breath, leaning against the same bookshelf and taking in the progress we had made, there was a mutual acknowledgement in the air. Not a spoken confession, but a recognition of presence, of two people discovering a subtle, magnetic pull toward one another. The tension was quiet yet undeniable, the kind that makes ordinary moments feel charged with potential, and the simple act of sharing a task together had transformed into something unexpectedly profound. After hours of moving boxes and arranging the room, a comfortable pause settled over us. She suggested we take a break, and we found ourselves sitting side by side near a window that overlooked the garden. Sunlight streamed in, casting warm, golden patterns on the floor and brushing lightly against our shoulders. The air smelled faintly of tea she had prepared earlier, mingling with the lingering scent of polished wood and the soft perfume she always seemed to carry. For a moment, there was silence, and it felt unexpectedly weighty. Not awkward, just deliberate, a quiet space where words were unnecessary. I noticed how she leaned slightly toward the window, her posture relaxed yet elegant, fingers lightly tracing the rim of her cup. There was an ease in her presence that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy I felt in my chest. I realized I had been holding my breath more often than I knew, waiting for a small gesture, a glance, anything to acknowledge the unspoken connection forming between us. Then she began to speak. Not about work or mundane tasks, but about herself. A story surfaced, a memory tinged with vulnerability, about a time when she had faced a difficult decision in her life. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying a mixture of regret and quiet pride. She spoke of fears, of choices made, and of the moments that shaped her, revealing layers I hadn't expected to see. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn not only by curiosity, but by an instinctive desire to understand her more deeply. I responded carefully, not with words that tried to solve or advise, but with empathy. I shared a memory from my own life, a smaller struggle, a moment that had taught me humility or patience. The exchange was natural, almost effortless, and yet it carried a weight that neither of us had anticipated. Each glance, each subtle smile, each slight nod reinforced a bond forming in real time, a silent acknowledgement that these moments mattered. Our proximity became more noticeable. Sitting on the edge of the window seat, our shoulders occasionally brushed. A stray lock of her hair fell forward, and I found myself instinctively tucking it back behind her ear, a gesture small yet intimate. She did not pull away. Instead, she caught my gaze, and in that brief meeting of eyes, there was a spark of recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement that something beyond friendship was beginning to stir. The room seemed to amplify our closeness. The faint ticking of the clock, the soft rustle of leaves outside, and the subtle hum of the house's heating system combined to create a cocoon around us. Even the sunlight seemed to linger, highlighting the contours of her face, the quiet smile that tugged at my thoughts, the way her eyes softened as she spoke. By the time we finished our tea, the air between us had shifted. The unspoken tension was no longer mere curiosity, it had deepened into something palpable. I realized, almost reluctantly, that I was not just observing her, but feeling alongside her. The slow burn of connection had moved beyond glances and touches. It had entered the realm of understanding and shared emotional space. In that quiet pause, amid the warmth of sunlight and the subtle fragrance that surrounded her, I felt the first real stirrings of something I could neither name nor ignore, a bond forming with depth, patience, and a quiet intensity that promised to shape everything to come. By late afternoon, the room had settled into a quiet rhythm. The boxes were mostly unpacked, furniture was in place, and the subtle aroma of her perfume mingled with the faint scent of polished wood and warm tea lingering in the corners. I stood back for a moment, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow, and allowed myself a glance at her. She was arranging a few framed photos on a shelf, her movements graceful and deliberate, her posture casual yet effortlessly commanding. Even in this ordinary moment, she radiated a quiet authority, a presence that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. It was then that the conflict began to press in. I felt the undeniable pull of attraction, a mix of admiration and curiosity that went beyond casual politeness. But layered over that was hesitation, an internal dialogue I couldn't silence. She was older, worldly, confident in ways I was only beginning to understand, and my own youth suddenly felt heavier, as though every thought, gesture, or glance carried a weight of potential misstep. Could I navigate this connection without overstepping boundaries? Did my feelings belong here, in this space, or was I intruding on something I had no right to touch? I found myself analyzing every interaction from earlier in the day. That brief brush of her hand on mine while moving a box, the way our shoulders had almost touched while arranging furniture, the way her laughter lingered in the air longer than expected. Each small, seemingly innocent gesture now carried a weight I hadn't noticed at first. My mind spun with questions, doubts, and the sharp pang of desire I could neither suppress nor openly acknowledge. She, too, seemed aware of the tension, though she never named it aloud. Her glances lingered just slightly longer than casual, a subtle touch when handing me an object, the small tilt of her head as if inviting conversation, but never forcing it. There was a delicate balance in the way she operated, a careful dance between connection and restraint that mirrored my own inner struggle. As I moved to adjust a lamp on a side table, I caught myself hesitating, my hand hovering longer than necessary, aware that each motion could be interpreted in ways I didn't intend. My thoughts raced. Is this foolish? Am I imagining this? Or is something real developing between us? The questions themselves were exhausting, a quiet storm of desire and self-restraint. The sensory details of the room heightened everything. The faint ticking of a clock, the creak of the floorboards beneath our movements, and the gentle hum of the heating system combined to create a cocoon of awareness. Every subtle sound felt amplified, every glance and gesture loaded with meaning. Even the sunlight slanting through the window seemed to spotlight the tension, casting long shadows that mirrored my inner uncertainty. By the time we paused again, taking a brief rest near the window, the emotional weight was palpable. Neither of us spoke, the questions circling in our minds, but the silence was loaded with mutual recognition. Attraction had surfaced, desire was present, and yet hesitation governed every move. This was the crucible moment. Our connection had deepened beyond casual curiosity, yet both of us were acutely aware of the boundaries, social, moral, and personal, that threatened to complicate everything. It was a quiet, slow-burning conflict, the kind that makes ordinary tasks feel charged and ordinary spaces feel alive with potential. In this fragile tension, the stage was set for what would come next, a moment of closeness, a spark that neither of us could ignore, and the first tentative step toward revealing the emotions we had so carefully contained. The day had stretched long, each hour layered with quiet tension, subtle touches, and shared laughter. By late afternoon, the room was nearly organized, yet an unspoken energy remained between us, a current of awareness that neither of us had fully named. I found myself lingering in the space, drawn to her presence in a way that felt both thrilling and disarming. It was while moving a particularly heavy box of books that our proximity became unavoidable. She stepped closer to guide me around a narrow spot, her hand lightly brushing the small of my back, not a touch that could be labeled as forward, but enough to send a jolt through me. My own hand hovered near hers, and for a heartbeat, I realized how acutely I was aware of her warmth, the softness of her skin, the natural elegance of her movements. It was a small, unspoken confession delivered through gesture rather than words, and I felt my pulse quicken. We paused, catching our breath, and our eyes met. The intensity of the moment was quiet but undeniable. There was no rush, no pressure, only the shared recognition that the space between us had shifted. Her gaze held something I couldn't quite name: curiosity, acknowledgement, perhaps even longing. I could see it reflected in her subtle smile, the gentle tilt of her head, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly as if inviting trust. Then came a brief, accidental brush of our hands as she reached to adjust a frame nearby. The contact lingered fractionally longer than necessary, and we both froze, acutely aware of the electricity in that fleeting connection. I realized then that words were unnecessary. The physical cues, subtle and respectful, carried everything we had not yet voiced. The warmth of her touch lingered, and I felt a stirring of emotions I had been carefully restraining all day. We moved closer, naturally, as if guided by the rhythm of shared work. I helped steady a chair she was lifting, our hands meeting briefly on the polished wood. She did not pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered, brushing gently against mine. It was a silent acknowledgement, a confession in miniature, a way of saying, "I feel it too," without the vulnerability of words. The room seemed to shrink around us. The faint hum of the heating, the distant ticking of a clock, the subtle creak of floorboards all heightened the intimacy of proximity. Every gesture, every glance, every shared breath carried weight. Even the sunlight streaming through the window seemed to linger on her face, highlighting the soft curve of her smile, the depth in her eyes, the quiet elegance in the way she moved. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and unhurried. "You make this feel easier, better." There was a vulnerability in her tone, a quiet honesty that made my chest tighten. I responded with the simplest of truths, my words deliberate, calm, and sincere. "Being here with you, it's not just the work. It's everything else." For a moment, silence reclaimed the room, but it was no longer empty. It was full of understanding, acknowledgement, and an unspoken promise that what had begun today was real, even if tentative. Our emotions had surfaced not through grand declarations, but through shared actions, lingering touches, and the subtle courage to simply be present with one another. In that moment, the slow-burn tension reached its peak, quiet, YouTube-safe, and profoundly human. The emotional connection between us had been acknowledged, leaving space for the next step, honesty, reflection, and the emotional resolution that would follow in the final part of the story. The room was quiet now, bathed in the soft, golden light of late afternoon. The last of the boxes had been unpacked, furniture arranged, and a sense of calm settled over the space. Yet despite the order around us, an invisible energy lingered between us, a quiet awareness of everything that had shifted in the hours we had spent together. It was no longer just the brush of hands, the lingering glances, or the subtle confessions through action. Something deeper had taken root, a connection that demanded recognition. We found ourselves sitting across from each other near the window, the same place where we had shared tea days ago. The sun had softened into a gentle glow, spilling warmth over our shoulders, illuminating the small, familiar details, the curve of her smile, the delicate line of her hand resting lightly on the windowsill, the way her eyes seemed to search mine for understanding. The house itself felt intimate, a silent witness to the evolution of our relationship, holding our conversations and quiet moments as if preserving them for later reflection. Finally, the words came, tentative but deliberate. She spoke first, her voice low, almost hesitant, yet steady. "I've enjoyed today, more than I expected. It feels different, being here with you." I nodded, feeling my chest tighten with the same mixture of anticipation and vulnerability that had defined the day. I responded simply, honestly, "I feel the same. It's unexpected but real." There was a pause, a breath held in mutual acknowledgement. No one rushed to fill the silence. Instead, we let it linger, allowing the weight of our emotions to settle, the tension to dissipate gently into understanding. I could see in her eyes that she had considered the implications, our age difference, the societal expectations, the uncertainties, but what mattered in this moment was the truth of how we felt. Our hands found each other naturally, resting lightly atop the windowsill. The touch was gentle, lingering, a quiet promise of mutual care and acknowledgement. There was no urgency, no need for grand gestures. The intimacy of simply being present, of sharing the space and recognizing our feelings, carried all the weight necessary. I felt a warmth spread through me, not just from her touch, but from the knowledge that our connection had been honored, spoken, and felt without forcing it into a mold it wasn't ready for. Depending on the emotional path chosen, the ending unfolded subtly. Together and secure, we leaned closer, sharing a brief, gentle handhold, smiling with the ease of two people who had chosen to pursue this connection openly, aware of the challenges but committed to navigating them together. Together but uncertain, we acknowledged the bond with a lingering glance and soft smiles, agreeing to explore what this meant for us, leaving the future open but infused with hope. Emotional resolution without romance. We parted as friends, sharing a heartfelt hug that conveyed gratitude, admiration, and the impact of a deep emotional connection that transcended romance. Separation with lasting impact. Circumstances pulled us apart, but a quiet acknowledgement, through a lingering smile or a shared look, confirmed that the bond would remain a meaningful part of our lives, shaping us in ways we could not yet fully articulate. As the light shifted, casting long shadows across the floor, I realized that the day had transformed more than just a room. It had reshaped the contours of our understanding, our connection, and our hearts. The slow burn had reached its gentle climax, not in drama, not in spectacle, but in the subtle, powerful recognition of human vulnerability, affection, and emotional courage. We stayed there for a moment longer, letting the quiet intimacy linger, knowing that whatever came next, whether together or apart this day, this connection, had changed us forever.